The woman still sat in the quiet corner, her emotions swirling like a storm she couldn't fully control. The room around her was still loud, full of people chatting, laughing, and moving about, but it no longer mattered as much. She had felt the sting of humiliation, yet now she felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time: attention without judgment. The presence of the kind man who had approached her lingered in her mind. It was strange to feel seen in a place where so many had ignored or mocked her. He had not forced her to talk or offered empty comfort. Instead, he had simply acknowledged her pain and given her a space to breathe. That small act, simple as it was, made her heart feel lighter than it had in years. She realized that someone else noticing her sadness didn't make her weak, it made her human. Slowly, she began to straighten her posture, lifting her chin just slightly. Her trembling hands rested more calmly in her lap, and for the first time that evening, she allowed herself to notice the warmth of someone's genuine concern. Meanwhile, the kind man didn't leave. He stayed nearby, not hovering, not intrusive, just present. He observed quietly, as if waiting for her to feel ready to respond. She kept her gaze down at first, unsure if she could trust her own feelings. But something about his calm demeanor made her feel safe. She started to feel that maybe she wasn't entirely alone. Even in a room full of strangers who had tried to make her feel small, the murmurs and whispers of the people across the room still echoed faintly, but they had lost some of their power over her. She realized that the cruelty of others only had as much influence as she allowed it to have. That thought was new, almost foreign to her. For so long she had let judgment shape her self-worth, letting every cruel word she had ever heard define her. But here, with someone showing her unexpected kindness, she began to feel a shift within herself. Slowly, she dared to lift her eyes and glance at the man again. He smiled softly, not a forced smile, but a gentle one that reached his eyes. There was no pity there, only genuine human concern. That small gesture encouraged her to speak, to open up in a way she hadn't done with anyone at this event. I feel invisible sometimes, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music and chatter around them. People make me feel like I don't belong anywhere. He nodded thoughtfully, listening without interrupting, without rushing her. I understand, he said softly. It's not fair when people judge without knowing someone's story. But your worth isn't defined by what they say. You are more than their words. His words were simple, yet powerful. They carried a weight of sincerity that made her feel that, for the first time in a long time, she could breathe freely again. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes once more. But this time, they weren't only tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. Relief that someone had truly seen her. Relief that someone had chosen to respond with kindness instead of turning away like everyone else had. Relief that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. She tried to smile, unsure if she could, but the small upward curve of her lips surprised her. She felt a tiny spark of hope, a feeling she hadn't recognized in years. He continued to engage her in quiet conversation, asking about her interests, her dreams, and the things that brought her joy. He wasn't trying to flatter her or distract from her pain. He was genuinely curious about who she was as a person. As she spoke, she felt a strange lightness in her chest. Talking about her passions, the things she loved, reminded her that she had value beyond appearance. She realized that people often overlooked her because they didn't take the time to truly see her. But in this small, quiet corner, she felt seen. Truly seen. Time seemed to slow down. The sounds of laughter, chatter, and music faded into the background as they shared the moment. She found herself laughing softly at something he said, a sound that felt unfamiliar and freeing. Her smile grew more natural as the minutes passed. The crowd around them hadn't changed, but her perspective had. She no longer felt entirely at their mercy. She felt a small but powerful sense of control. Control over how she allowed the words of others to affect her. The man continued to listen, nod, and respond with empathy. You know, he said gently, people often judge what they don't understand. But it says more about them than it does about you. Don't let their ignorance define your happiness. Those words sank deeply into her heart. She realized that her struggles weren't about her being too much, or not enough. They were about the world's inability to accept someone who didn't fit into a narrow mold. That realization was liberating in a way she hadn't expected. She looked around the room again, noticing the people who had whispered and laughed. Before, they had felt like a wall she could never overcome. Now they seemed smaller somehow, less significant. Their opinions did not hold the same power. For the first time in a long time, she understood that her self-worth was hers to define, not theirs. That thought filled her with a quiet strength, one that made her sit taller and breathe more deeply. The man smiled again, noticing her change in posture. "See," he said softly, "you're stronger than you think. You don't need anyone's approval to know your value." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. It wasn't an instant fix. She knew she still carried years of doubt and hurt, but it was a beginning. A start of something new, a small crack in the wall of insecurity that had held her for so long. He didn't stop there. He continued to talk with her, sharing stories of challenges he had faced. Moments where he had been misunderstood, times when he had felt small in the world. It wasn't about boasting or seeking attention. It was about showing her that everyone faces struggles, and that even those who seem confident or untouchable have moments of doubt. Listening to his experiences, she realized that life was full of people who had faced judgment, yet had found ways to rise above it. That gave her hope that she could too. The conversation shifted naturally from heavy emotions to lighter topics, and she began to feel a sense of normalcy. For the first time that evening, she felt like she could just be herself, without fear of ridicule. She laughed again, more freely this time, and the warmth of that laughter surprised her. It reminded her of times when she had been happy without self-consciousness. Long before judgment had started to shape her self-image, around them the room continued in its usual rhythm. Some people still whispered, unaware of the quiet transformation happening in the corner. Others were busy with their own conversations and activities, oblivious to the small miracle unfolding. But the woman no longer cared. In that moment, she had found something rare and precious: empathy, understanding, and a reminder that her presence mattered. By the end of part 2, she felt a quiet confidence growing inside her. She had been humiliated just moments ago, but now she understood that kindness could overpower cruelty, even if just for a little while. The man had shown her that someone could choose to respond with humanity instead of judgment, and that had changed everything. She realized that, even in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, there were still moments of light. And she had experienced one of them that evening. As she stood up from the corner, brushing imaginary dust from her dress, she felt a sense of empowerment. Not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that quietly reminded her she was worthy of respect and kindness. She took a deep breath, ready to face the rest of the night with a newfound strength. The whispers might still be there, the judgment might still exist, but it no longer held the power it once did. She had found a different perspective, one that would stay with her long after the event ended. The man gave her one last encouraging smile before returning to the crowd. He didn't make a scene, didn't call attention to what had happened. He simply acknowledged her, shared a moment of human connection, and left her with a sense of hope. She watched him move away, feeling grateful for the kindness he had shown. In a world that often focused on cruelty and judgment, he had reminded her that empathy and understanding could make a difference, sometimes more than words could express. And in that corner of a crowded room, the woman finally allowed herself to believe something she hadn't in a long time: that she mattered, that she was seen, and that her worth was not defined by the opinions of others. That small, powerful realization was enough to change her night, and perhaps even change the way she viewed herself in the days to come. After the quiet corner conversation, the woman felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Her chest wasn't as tight, and her mind felt lighter. The presence of someone who saw her as a person, rather than a target for ridicule, lingered in her thoughts. But she knew she couldn't stay hidden in the corner forever. Slowly, she began to rise, taking careful steps back into the crowd. Each step felt deliberate, like reclaiming space she had always thought she didn't deserve. The man had returned to the crowd, blending naturally among the other guests. He wasn't trying to draw attention to himself, but his presence was noticeable. People moved around him, smiling and chatting, but he kept a watchful eye on her, making sure she felt supported. She caught his glance and nodded slightly, feeling a quiet reassurance. That small acknowledgement gave her courage. The courage to face the world outside the corner for the first time that evening. As she walked slowly through the crowd, she noticed the whispers that had seemed so loud before. Some people still glanced at her, some still whispered, but their words didn't sting as sharply now. The kindness she had experienced had shifted something inside her. It wasn't a magic shield, but it was enough to remind her that she was not defined by other people's cruelty. Each step through the room was like claiming a small victory, and she felt a growing sense of confidence with every movement. People began to notice the change in her demeanor. Her head was held higher, her movements more assured. There was a subtle light in her eyes, a sense of calm strength that hadn't been there before. Those who had whispered before looked momentarily puzzled, perhaps sensing that their words no longer held power over her. The room was still the same, but her perspective had changed, and that made all the difference. The man who had spoken with her approached again, offering a small, encouraging smile. "You're doing great," he said softly, not drawing attention but giving her a boost of confidence. She smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest. His words weren't loud or showy. They were gentle, like a hand resting on her shoulder in support. And just like that, she felt a little stronger, a little more ready to face whatever came next. Something shifted in the atmosphere. The people around them, once cruel and mocking, began to notice her calm confidence. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make them pause. One or two shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as if realizing their words had little effect. Others simply carried on, unaware of the quiet transformation happening in the corner of the room. Yet for the woman it didn't matter what they thought anymore. She was beginning to understand that true strength came from within, not from the opinions of others. Encouraged, she moved closer to the center of the room. The music and chatter were still present, but they no longer overwhelmed her. She noticed small details she had ignored before, the sparkle of decorations, the laughter of people who weren't judging, and the simple beauty of the evening. For the first time that night she felt like she belonged. Not because anyone had given her permission, but because she had chosen to step into the space and claim it for herself. The man stayed nearby, not hovering, but present. At one point, he gestured toward a group who had been whispering, saying something quietly. She didn't catch the words, but she understood the gesture. He was subtly signaling that she didn't need to fear them. That small support, invisible to others, gave her a profound sense of safety. She realized that sometimes the presence of one caring person could change everything, even in a room full of strangers. Slowly, she began to engage with the event itself. She laughed at a joke someone nearby made, smiled at people passing by, and even exchanged a few friendly words. Each interaction, small as it was, felt like a triumph. She wasn't trying to prove herself to anyone. She was simply existing in the space, showing that she had a right to be there, just like anyone else. That small act of being herself felt revolutionary after years of feeling invisible and judged. The people who had initially mocked her began to notice the shift. Some looked surprised, others seemed unsure of how to react. A few even smiled awkwardly, realizing that their whispers had no power over her. The woman, however, didn't seek their approval or care about their change in attitude. She had already found validation in the kindness shown to her and in the courage she discovered within herself. That realization was liberating. The man who had been quietly guiding her with support and empathy moved slightly closer, offering words of encouragement again. "See how strong you are," he said softly. "It's not about what they think. It's about how you feel about yourself." She nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and pride. It was a lesson she had needed for a long time. That strength came from within, and self-worth could not be taken away by anyone else. As the night progressed, she felt more and more like a participant rather than an observer. She joined a small conversation with a group of guests, sharing her thoughts and even making a few jokes. The laughter that followed wasn't directed at her appearance or her past insecurities. It was genuine, warm, and inclusive. For the first time that evening, she felt fully accepted in the moment. Not because anyone had to accept her, but because she had allowed herself to step forward and embrace her own worth. The quiet acts of kindness from the man had a ripple effect. People began to notice her confidence, not in a judgmental way, but as a presence that naturally drew respect. It wasn't loud or confrontational, but subtle. Others started treating her differently not because she demanded it, but because she carried herself with a calm dignity that couldn't be ignored. The whispers faded into the background, replaced by a new energy. One that was more respectful and considerate. She realized that her journey that evening wasn't just about surviving ridicule or standing up to judgment. It was about discovering a strength she didn't know she had. The kind man had shown her that empathy could change everything, and that she didn't have to wait for others to validate her worth. She had found her own validation, her own power, and her own voice. That realization filled her with an unexpected joy, one that made her heart feel lighter than it had in years. The event continued around them, but she no longer felt trapped or anxious. She moved freely, interacted naturally, and even smiled at people she didn't know. Each small action was a victory, a step toward reclaiming her confidence and self-esteem. The man who had helped her remained nearby, offering quiet support without drawing attention to himself. His presence was reassuring, reminding her that one kind gesture could make a lasting impact. Even in the face of years of judgment. By the end of part 3, the woman had transformed from someone hiding in the shadows to someone who embraced her space in the room. The whispers of judgment were still there, but they no longer controlled her. She had discovered the power of kindness, empathy, and self-respect. She understood that one small act of human connection could ripple outward, inspiring change not only within herself but also in the people around her. That night she felt a sense of freedom and empowerment that she had never thought possible, and it all began with a single act of unassuming kindness. By now, the woman had begun to feel a quiet confidence that was almost foreign to her. The fear and anxiety that had weighed on her all evening were slowly being replaced by something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of self-worth and inner strength. The kindness shown to her in the quiet corner had sparked a change, and she could feel it ripple through her thoughts and actions. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, but the night was far from over. As she moved through the room, she noticed more people paying attention, not in a mocking way, but in a subtle, curious way. Some guests glanced at her with a new respect, sensing the change in her posture and demeanor. The whispers that had made her feel small before seemed weaker now, almost powerless in the face of the quiet courage she displayed. With each step she took, she realized that her presence alone was becoming a statement, a testament to resilience and self-acceptance. The man who had supported her stayed nearby, a calm anchor in the midst of the bustling crowd. He didn't need to intervene anymore. She had found her own strength. But his presence was reassuring, a reminder that human kindness could make a difference, and that she didn't have to face the world entirely alone. He gave her a small nod, and she returned it with a smile. Understanding that she was ready to embrace the rest of the evening, a small group of people had gathered near the center of the room, engaged in conversation and laughter. The woman hesitated at first, unsure if she should join, but a part of her, the part that had been encouraged by empathy and gentle guidance, urged her forward. She walked toward them, feeling the weight of uncertainty, but also the excitement of possibility. This was a moment where she could choose to let confidence guide her, rather than fear. As she approached, one of the group members looked up and smiled warmly. "Hello," they said. "We haven't met before. Come join us." There was no hint of judgment, only an open invitation to participate. The woman felt a surge of relief and gratitude. It was simple, almost ordinary, but it mattered immensely. She had been isolated for so long, surrounded by judgment and whispers, that a genuine invitation felt revolutionary. She joined the conversation, listening first, absorbing the energy of the group. Slowly, she began to contribute her own thoughts, sharing small stories and observations. The others listened attentively, nodding and responding with interest. For the first time that night, she felt heard, not for her appearance, not for any flaw, but for the person she truly was. Her words mattered, and her presence mattered. The laughter and smiles exchanged were warm and inclusive, a stark contrast to the judgment she had endured earlier. The room seemed to shift around her. People who had been whispering and judging began to notice the change in energy. Some glanced at her curiously, others with a hint of admiration, seeing the quiet strength she now radiated. It wasn't that she had sought to prove them wrong. She simply existed in the space with a new confidence, and it was impossible to ignore. Her courage had become contagious, inspiring small changes in the behavior of those around her. The man who had guided her from the corner stepped back slightly, allowing her to shine on her own. He observed quietly, knowing that the real power was now within her. The woman felt a sense of independence and empowerment that was almost intoxicating. She realized that the kindness she had received had not only helped her survive the moment of shame, but it had also sparked something transformative and awakening to her own worth and potential. As the evening continued, she noticed others observing her interactions. A few people who had previously mocked her now seemed reflective, perhaps reconsidering their own actions and words. She didn't seek revenge or acknowledgement. Her focus was on being herself, fully and unapologetically. But the effect of her confidence and authenticity began to ripple outward, quietly influencing the atmosphere of the room. People were beginning to recognize that cruelty was weak, while kindness and courage were powerful. One moment stood out vividly. A person from the group she had joined made a comment about the importance of empathy, about noticing when someone is hurting and offering support. The woman smiled, thinking back to the simple act of kindness that had changed her evening. She realized that empathy was not just a moral ideal. It was transformative. It could change someone's night, their self-perception, and perhaps even their life. That thought gave her a profound sense of purpose. If she could pass on even a fraction of the kindness she had received, she could make a real difference. She began to engage more actively with others, offering smiles, listening to stories, and sharing moments of humor. Every interaction, though small, reinforced her sense of belonging. She noticed subtle changes in the crowd, more respectful glances, softer tones, and a shift from judgment to curiosity. Her presence had become a quiet force, a reminder that human connection could overcome cruelty. She was no longer a passive participant in the event. She was a contributor, a source of positive energy, and a living example of resilience. The man who had first approached her now stood slightly to the side, observing the impact of the evening. He smiled to himself, knowing that true change often began quietly, with a simple act of recognition and care. He didn't need applause or acknowledgement. The woman's newfound confidence and the subtle transformation of the room were reward enough. For her, this moment marked a turning point, not just in her evening, but in how she viewed herself and the world. By the end of the night, the woman felt a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced in a long time. The room had been a place of shame and isolation earlier, but it had transformed into a space where she felt empowered, respected, and valued. The whispers of cruelty were no longer frightening. They were background noise to the powerful realization that she could define her own worth. She had discovered a strength within herself that could not be diminished by judgment or ridicule. As she prepared to leave, she glanced around the room, noticing small acts of kindness happening in different corners, people helping each other, offering words of encouragement, sharing smiles. She realized that kindness could spread quietly but powerfully, affecting not just one person but many. Her own experience had been a catalyst, inspiring subtle changes in others and reinforcing the importance of empathy. The ripple effect of one simple act had created a wave of positivity that extended far beyond her own story. Walking out into the night, she felt a profound sense of hope and possibility. She understood that life would not always be easy and that judgment and cruelty would still exist. But she also knew that empathy, courage, and self-respect could overcome those challenges. The evening had shown her that even in moments of shame and vulnerability, human connection could transform despair into hope. She had experienced it firsthand, and it had left an indelible mark on her heart. She thought about the man who had first approached her with kindness. His gesture had been quiet, unassuming, yet powerful. It had given her the courage to step into her own light and claim her place in the world. She realized that sometimes the most meaningful acts of heroism are not grand or public. They are simple, human, and deeply empathetic. That evening had been a testament to the power of kindness and the strength of the human spirit. By the time she reached her car, she felt different, stronger, lighter, and more confident. The night had been a journey from shame to empowerment, from invisibility to recognition. She had discovered a new way of seeing herself, one that was not dependent on the opinions of others. She had learned that true strength came from within, supported by empathy, and that even one small act of kindness could change the course of someone's life. And as she drove home, she resolved to carry that lesson forward, not just for herself, but for others. She would be aware of the power of her words, the impact of her actions, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly were. The evening had taught her that kindness mattered, that human connection mattered, and that courage could be found even in the most unlikely of places. The woman stepped outside into the cool night air, her heart still full from the evening's unexpected journey. The lights from the event hall glimmered behind her, and for a moment she paused, taking in the quiet calm of the street. The night felt peaceful, almost magical, and she realized that something inside her had shifted completely. The fear and shame that had gripped her earlier had been replaced by a sense of calm confidence and inner strength she had never thought possible. As she walked to her car, she reflected on everything that had happened that evening. The whispers, the cruel remarks, the feeling of being invisible, it all seemed so distant now. What she remembered most clearly wasn't the judgment or the humiliation. It was the moment of kindness that had changed everything. That quiet act of empathy, the genuine concern shown to her in a simple conversation, had given her the courage to reclaim her space, her dignity, and her confidence. She thought about how the small gestures had grown into something bigger. One kind word had sparked a conversation. One conversation had sparked confidence. Confidence had led her to interact more freely with others, and in turn, her actions had inspired subtle changes in the people around her. She realized that kindness had a ripple effect, capable of spreading far beyond the initial moment. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The woman smiled, remembering the way the crowd had begun to change subtly. How people had responded differently once she carried herself with quiet confidence. She understood that empowerment didn't always have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it came from the small choices we make, choosing to stand tall, to speak up, to engage with humanity rather than hiding from it. That evening had shown her that strength and courage often start quietly, in moments of vulnerability and empathy. As she reached her car, she felt a sense of resolve. She knew that life would not always be easy, that there would still be challenges, judgment, and negativity. But she had discovered an important truth. Her worth was not determined by others. She was not defined by cruel words or harsh judgments. She was defined by her own heart, her choices, and the kindness she could offer and receive. That knowledge felt liberating. Driving home, she allowed herself to reflect on the deeper meaning of what had happened. It wasn't just about overcoming a moment of public shame. It was about discovering the power of empathy, the importance of human connection, and the ability to rise above negativity. She thought about the man who had first approached her with simple kindness. His words and actions had been quiet, almost invisible to others, yet they had transformed her entire evening and perhaps her way of seeing herself forever. She realized that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could create lasting change. They could heal wounds, rebuild confidence, and inspire courage. One human gesture had reminded her of her own worth and had shown her that even in a world that could be cruel, there were still moments of goodness. That evening had proven that empathy and compassion were powerful forces, able to transform fear into hope, shame into strength. When she finally arrived home, she stepped out of the car and paused for a moment, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the kindness she had received, gratitude for the newfound confidence she had discovered, and gratitude for the understanding that she could carry that light forward into the world. She knew that she didn't have to wait for someone else to lift her up. She could continue to do it for herself and for others who might need it. Over the next few days, the memory of that evening stayed with her. She noticed small changes in the way she carried herself, in the way she interacted with others, and in the way she viewed herself. She smiled more freely, laughed more openly, and held her head a little higher. She realized that confidence was not about perfection or meeting someone else's standards. It was about embracing who she was, flaws and all, and allowing herself to exist fully in the world without fear of judgment. She also noticed subtle changes in her community. People who had once been dismissive or unkind were now quieter, perhaps more thoughtful when interacting with others. She didn't seek recognition or revenge, but she could see that her actions and the courage she had found had influenced others in small ways. It was a reminder that transformation wasn't always dramatic or visible, but it was powerful nonetheless. One day, she shared her experience with a close friend, recounting the journey from shame to empowerment. She spoke about the cruelty she had faced, the kindness that had changed everything, and the lessons she had learned. As she spoke, she realized that telling her story was itself a form of healing. Sharing her experience could inspire others who felt invisible, powerless, or judged. She wanted people to know that empathy could change lives, that courage could grow from kindness, and that self-worth was something no one could take away. The woman began to carry that lesson forward in her everyday life. She offered small acts of kindness to others, smiles, encouraging words, moments of genuine attention. She noticed how these gestures, though simple, had the power to lift people in ways she couldn't always predict. She had experienced it firsthand, and now she wanted to be a part of that cycle of empathy and care. Each small act became a thread in a larger tapestry of human connection. Reinforcing the lessons she had learned that unforgettable night, she also reflected on her own growth. The fear and shame that had once dominated her thoughts were no longer controlling her. She felt empowered to face new challenges, to interact with others without hesitation, and to embrace herself fully. She realized that the journey wasn't about eliminating fear or avoiding judgment entirely. It was about learning to navigate the world with courage, compassion, and confidence. That perspective gave her freedom, a freedom she had never experienced before. As the days turned into weeks, she found herself carrying the memory of the man's quiet act of kindness as a guiding light. It reminded her that the world could be harsh, but it could also be gentle and compassionate. She began to notice opportunities to help others who might be struggling, offering empathy in moments where it could make a difference. She understood that while one person's kindness had transformed her, she had the power to do the same for others. That realization filled her with purpose and hope. Eventually, the woman realized that her life had subtly shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer the person who shrank from judgment or hid from the world. She was someone who could face challenges with resilience, someone who could embrace her own worth, and someone who could inspire others through empathy and courage. Her experience had taught her that transformation often began quietly, through simple human connection, and that the impact of kindness could be profound and lasting. Looking back on that evening, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the courage she had found within herself, gratitude for the empathy shown to her, and gratitude for the realization that human connection could heal wounds that had lingered for years. She understood that even a brief moment of genuine kindness could ripple outward, touching not only the life of the person receiving it, but also the lives of many others. As she moved forward in life, she carried the lessons of that night with her. She knew that moments of shame, judgment, or insecurity might still arise, but she now had the tools to face them with grace and confidence. She had learned that her worth was her own, that empathy was transformative, and that even one small act of kindness could create ripples far beyond what she could see. The experience had left her stronger, wiser, and more compassionate both toward herself and toward others. In the end, the woman realized that her story was not just about overcoming humiliation or finding confidence. It was about the enduring power of human connection. It was about the ability of one person's empathy to transform another's life. It was about courage, self-respect, and the understanding that kindness matters. And as she continued to navigate the world, she carried that truth with her, forever changed by a single, quiet act of compassion that had turned a night of shame into a life-changing lesson in hope, courage, and humanity.